When I moved into this quiet little neighborhood, I thought I'd finally found peace. The lawns were perfect, the smiles seemed friendly, but underneath it all, something was off. Within a week, I started receiving letters, anonymous notes telling me what I could and couldn't do on my own property. Then came the fines, and the cameras pointed straight up my house. I tried to ignore it until one night, I caught my neighbor standing in my backyard holding something in his hand. That's when I realized this wasn't about rules, it was personal. When I first saw Maplewood Estates, it looked like a postcard come to life. Perfectly trimmed hedges, pastel-painted mailboxes, and smiling neighbors waving as I drove past. After years of living in the city, the quiet hum with sprinklers and birdsong felt like peace finally had an address. My wife Lita called it our fresh start. I called it freedom. We bought the corner house, a 2-story colonial with white shutters and a front porch big enough for morning coffee and evening sunsets. Every detail felt right. The scent of new paint, the creak of wooden floors, the laughter of kids biking past. It wasn't just a house, it was hope. The first week was almost surreal. The HOA sent a welcome basket, muffins, a rule book, and a note signed by Janet, HOA president. She lived 2 houses down, always smiling, always watching. There was something almost too polished about her, the kind of person who measured her happiness in straight fence lines and uniform flower beds. But at the time, I thought nothing of it. Lena joined the neighborhood gardening group, and I started fixing up the backyard, adding a few solar lights, a bird bath, and my pride and joy, a handcrafted wooden shed. It wasn't much, just a small weekend project to store tools. But the moment it went up, I noticed something strange. Neighbors began slowing down as they passed by. Some stared a little too long. Others whispered and turned away. I caught Janet one morning standing across the street, hands on her hips, looking at my shed like it was an eyesore in her perfect painting. She waved when she saw me, that same tight smile on her face, but her eyes didn't smile back. A few days later, a letter appeared in my mailbox. Dear resident, your recent backyard structure may violate HOA design standards. Please review section 4.3 regarding approved outbuildings. No signature, just the HOA letterhead. I laughed it off. A misunderstanding, I thought. I had followed the guidelines I could find online. But when I mentioned it to a neighbor, his face tightened. Yeah, Janet doesn't like surprises, he said quietly. You might want to talk to her before it becomes official. That word, official, didn't sit right with me. This was my property, my home. But something about his tone made me realize that ownership in Maplewood Estates didn't mean freedom. It meant permission. By the end of the month, 2 more letters came. One about non-conforming paint color on the shed, and another about unauthorized lighting fixtures. I hadn't changed anything. Still, every time I walked outside, I could feel the eyes, from behind curtains, across driveways, over fences. It wasn't just a community anymore. It was a stage, and someone was always watching the show. Lena tried to stay optimistic. She said maybe it's just a mix-up, watering her roses. But even she started noticing things. The way Janet's SUV would slow down in front of our house during her morning drive, how our trash bin was suddenly misplaced after collection day, or how one of our garden lights had been broken overnight. Then came the HOA meeting. I wasn't planning to go, but curiosity got the better of me. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, an immaculate hall with coffee, pastries, and a laminated list of community priorities. Janet stood at the front like a queen addressing her court. Her voice was polite, but her words had weight. Every decision, every motion, every suggestion seemed to orbit around her approval. When it was time for open comments, I mentioned the shed, calmly, respectfully. The room went silent. Janet tilted her head and smiled, the kind of smile that hides a blade. Ah, yes, the unapproved structure on Elmwood Corner. We'll be reviewing that shortly. I trust you'll cooperate with the board. The board. Not neighbors, bored. That was the night I realized something. Maplewood Estates wasn't a neighborhood. It was a kingdom, and Janet was its ruler. As I drove home, the street lights flickered faintly, and for the first time, the quiet didn't feel peaceful. It felt controlled. The welcome basket, the smiles, the rules, all of it suddenly made sense. I wasn't living in a community. I was living under surveillance. And when I got home, there was another letter taped to my front door. Immediate compliance required. No date, no signature. Just those 3 words. That's when I knew something much bigger was coming, and this time I wasn't backing down.
The letter taped to my front door wasn't the last. It was the beginning. Over the next few weeks, they came like clockwork. Neat white envelopes slipped under the mat or wedged into the mailbox, each one colder, sharper than the last. Violation notice, final warning, assessment fee pending. For what? A shed? Some garden lights? At first, I tried reasoning with them. I sent emails, made calls, attended another meeting. But every time I tried to talk, I was met with smiles that didn't reach the eyes and responses that felt pre-written. All homeowners must comply with community design standards. Please refer to Section 4.3. Further non-compliance may result in fines. It was like arguing with a wall, only this wall had power over my life. Then, one morning, I noticed something strange. My mailbox was open. Inside wasn't the usual letterhead or HOA seal. It was a plain sheet of paper with 6 words scrawled in thick black ink. Stop pushing back. She always wins. No signature.
Days turned into weeks, and the tension started eating into everything. Lena stopped going to the gardening group. The neighbors stopped waving. One even crossed the street to avoid me. The air itself felt different, heavy, charged, like everyone knew something I didn't. Then one night I heard it, a faint hum, like an electric buzz coming from outside. I went to the window and froze. A camera, mounted on the lamppost right outside my driveway, angled directly at my home. The next day, another fine arrived. Unauthorized lawn ornament placement. They meant the new flower pot Lena had put near the porch. Coincidence? No chance. So I decided to test a theory. I moved the pot just a few inches to the left. 2 days later, another fine. Failure to maintain exterior design. They were watching. Constantly. I started documenting everything. Photos, timestamps, letters. I even installed my own camera on the front porch, hidden behind a light fixture. At first, it caught nothing but cars and stray cats, but one night, around 2:13 a.m., movement triggered the feed. The video showed someone walking through my yard. Not a teenager, not a trespasser. Janet. She was wearing gloves, flashlight in hand, checking my fence, peering into my windows, like she owned the place. That was the breaking point. I took the footage to a lawyer. He told me the HOA had overstepped, that if I could prove harassment, I had a case. Finally, I thought, the tide was turning. But when I showed up at the next HOA meeting with my evidence, the room turned against me. Janet stood there, calm and collected, and before I could even speak, she pulled out a stack of papers. "Mr. Carter," she said sweetly, "we've received multiple complaints about your aggressive behavior toward neighbors. For their safety, the board has voted to impose a lien on your property until further review." The words hit like a hammer. A lien? On my home? For aggressive behavior? She had flipped the script completely. I looked around the room. The same neighbors who once smiled at me now stared with cold, blank expressions. I was the villain in her story now. "You can't do this," I said quietly. Janet tilted her head. "I already have." That night, I barely slept. The house felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by fear. Every creak sounded like footsteps, every flicker like eyes watching. Lena tried to calm me. "Maybe we should move," she whispered. "It's not worth it." But that's exactly what Janet wanted. I couldn't let her win, not after everything she'd done. So I went back to digging, this time deeper. I filed public records requests, scoured property tax logs, even talked to a few former residents who'd moved out of Maplewood Estates. What they told me made my stomach turn. They'd all left after similar conflicts, fines, liens, even foreclosures. In each case, Janet's HOA had taken over their homes through non-payment of dues and sold them, often to the same buyer, a company named MWE Properties LLC. And guess whose name appeared on the board of that company? Janet Reynolds. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was profiting from them. The next HOA meeting was my reckoning. I showed up early, laptop in hand, documents ready. I had proof, enough to expose everything. But when the meeting began, something felt off. The usual crowd wasn't there. Just Janet, two silent board members, and a man I didn't recognize, wearing a suit, carrying a briefcase. Janet smiled as I walked in. "Mr. Carter, this is Mr. Hines, legal counsel from Maplewood Estates." He nodded, cold and formal. "We're here to discuss your ongoing violations and non-payment of fines. Unless you agree to immediate compliance and settlement, foreclosure proceedings will begin next month." It was a trap, a perfectly timed, perfectly legal ambush. I tried to speak, to show them the documents, but Janet raised her hand. "Enough," she said. "You've caused enough disruption. This meeting is adjourned." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking like a clock counting down. And for the first time since moving here, I felt real fear. Not anger, not frustration. Fear. Because I finally understood, this wasn't about lawns, sheds, or paint colors. This was systematic, a quiet, deliberate machine built to take everything from people who thought they owned something. And now, that machine was coming for me. That night, a storm rolled over Maplewood Estates. Rain hammered the roof as thunder cracked above. I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker, thinking about everything I'd learned. Then, lightning flashed, and for a split second, I saw her. Janet, standing across the street, in the rain, umbrella in hand, looking directly at my house, and smiling. The lights flickered again. When they came back on, she was gone. But in the morning, another envelope was taped to the door. Only this time, there were no words, just a single photograph of me sitting by that very same window the night before.
The photograph on my door changed everything. Someone had been outside my house watching me, taking pictures through the rain. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, lights off, heart pounding, staring at that picture until the sun came up. By morning, fear had burned itself into something else. Focus. If Janet wanted a war, I'd give her one. I contacted every resident I could, quietly, carefully, the ones who'd been fined, harassed, or driven out. At first, most ignored me, but when I showed them the documents, the fraudulent board signatures, the shell company MWE Properties LLC, the sales records, something shifted. They weren't just angry, they were relieved. Someone was finally saying what they all knew but were too scared to admit. One of them, a retired accountant named Paul, pulled out his old HOA letters. "She fined me for my fence being an inch too high," he said bitterly. "Then she tried to buy my house when I couldn't keep up with the fees. I thought it was bad luck. Turns out it was her plan all along." That was my proof. Pattern, motive, and victims. We gathered everything, emails, letters, invoices, and compiled it into one folder. Then I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to court quietly. I was going public. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. Janet always ran them like a queen presiding over her court, polite, polished, untouchable. But this time, I wasn't walking alone. As the sun dipped behind the maple trees, I parked near the clubhouse and sat for a moment, watching the lights flicker inside. Dozens of cars lined the lot, more than usual. Word had spread. Residents were tired. They wanted answers. I stepped out, rain spitting lightly against my jacket, folder in hand. My heart was racing, but underneath the fear was something stronger. Clarity. When I walked in, the chatter fell silent. Janet was already at the front, papers stacked neatly, that same icy smile plastered across her face. "Ah, Mr. Carter. I assume you're here to cause another scene?" I didn't answer. Instead, I placed the folder on the table in front of her and turned to the crowd. "No," I said. "I'm here so everyone can finally see what's been happening to this neighborhood." A murmur rippled through the room. Janet's expression flickered for the first time, just a crack. I clicked the remote connected to the projector. The screen behind her lit up, showing the first page of the HOA's financial report. "Over the past 3 years," I said, "Maplewood Estates has issued more than 180 fines to residents, totaling over $160,000. Nearly all of those fines came from one person's approval, Janet Reynolds." Gasps filled the room. Janet opened her mouth to respond, but I continued. "And here's where it gets interesting. When those homeowners couldn't pay, their properties went into default. Every single one of those homes was later sold to the same buyer, MWE Properties LLC. I clicked again. A document appeared showing the LLC's registration. And who owns that company? Janet Reynolds. The room erupted. People turned toward her, whispering, shouting, demanding answers. Janet stood perfectly still until she realized she'd lost control. "This is slander," she snapped, her voice sharp now, her mask cracking. "You have no proof." I held up the signed board documents. "Forgery of board signatures. Emails sent from your account approving transactions to your own company. You've been stealing from the people who trusted you." Her face flushed red. "You don't know what you're talking about," she hissed. But then Paul stood up. "I do," he said. "You took my house." Another woman followed. "And mine." Then another voice. "She fined me for my garden." Dozens rose to their feet, anger swelling like a wave. Janet tried to shout over them, but the noise drowned her out. For the first time, the perfect order of Maplewood Estates was gone, replaced by chaos, truth, and fury. The HOA's lawyer, Mr. Hines, stood up nervously, tugging at his collar. "Let's remain calm," he said weakly. "These are serious allegations." I interrupted. "They're not allegations. They're facts, and the county housing office is already reviewing them." That was a bluff. I hadn't gone to the county yet, but I would. The lawyer froze. Janet turned to him, eyes wide. "You told me—" she began, but stopped. The damage was done. Then, in one last desperate move, she lunged for the projector, yanking the cable out. The screen went black. "Meeting adjourned! Everyone out!" But no one moved. Phones were already out, recording. The neighbors she'd ruled over for years now stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking her path to the door. I picked up the folder from the table and looked at her one last time. "You build your empire on fear, but fear only works until people stop being afraid." For a moment, she didn't speak. Then her expression changed, from rage to something colder, emptier. She leaned close enough for only me to hear. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. You think this ends here? You're already finished." And with that, she walked out, past the crowd, past the stairs, into the storm outside.
The room stayed silent for a long time after she left. Then the shouting began again. Not anger this time, but relief, disbelief. The floodgate of people realizing they weren't powerless. They wanted action, new elections, refunds, accountability. For the first time since moving here, the neighborhood felt alive. That night, as the rain poured down, I sat on the porch, watching the projector light flicker off inside. My phone buzzed. Messages from neighbors thanking me, offering help, sharing their own stories. But then, one message stood out, from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have done that." No name, no sender, just that line. A chill crawled up my spine. I checked the porch camera feed, static. Every camera in the system had gone dark at the same time. Coincidence? Or something else? Before I could decide, headlights swept across the driveway. A black sedan rolled past slowly, stopping for just a moment in front of my house. I couldn't see the driver. Tinted windows. No plates I could make out. Then it drove off into the rain. I sat there for a long time, staring into the dark, realizing Janet's words weren't a bluff. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, everything exploded. The residents had posted the entire meeting online, every word, every accusation. Within hours, it had thousands of views. The county office called, then the local news. By noon, reporters were outside the Maplewood gates. The HOA's lawyer had gone silent. Janet's SUV was gone. It should have felt like victory, but deep down, I knew better. Because power doesn't just disappear. It hides, waits, regroups. And people like Janet didn't crumble. They repositioned. As I walked back into the house, Lena met me at the door, eyes wide. "You need to see this," she said, handing me her phone. On the screen was a post from an anonymous neighborhood account. It showed a blurry image of me at the meeting, labeled with bold red text, "Violent resident threatens HOA president." The caption read, "Maplewood's peace destroyed by one man's obsession. The board will pursue charges." It already had thousands of shares. I felt the air leave my lungs. The war wasn't over. It was changing shape. She was striking back from the shadows. And somewhere out there, behind another screen, I knew Janet was watching, smiling again. As night fell, thunder rolled over Maplewood Estates once more. The perfect lawns gleamed under the streetlights, and the rain began to fall, steady, unrelenting.
Inside, I closed my laptop, turned off the lights, and sat by the window, the same window from that photograph. Maybe I'd won a battle, but the war for my home, for this neighborhood's soul, had only just begun. And next time, I wouldn't be the one on the defense.
The storm didn't stop for 2 days. Maybe it was coincidence. Or maybe Maplewood Estates, so obsessed with perfection, needed the sky to wash itself clean. When the clouds finally broke, the streets glistened like glass. The sidewalks were littered with leaves and broken branches, and for once, the neighborhood didn't look perfect. It looked real. But peace? That was still far away. The morning after the HOA meeting went viral, Maplewood was buzzing. The same people who once avoided me were suddenly knocking on my door, offering coffee, thanks, apologies. For the first time, they weren't whispering. They were talking. Some were angry at Janet. Others were angry at themselves for looking the other way, for letting her rule unchecked. One neighbor, Mrs. Park, an elderly widow, stood on my porch crying. "She made me take down my son's memorial flag," she said softly. "Said it didn't match the aesthetic. I didn't even fight her. I just gave in." Her voice broke, and that's when it truly hit me. This wasn't just about property lines or paint colors. It was about control. Janet hadn't just abused rules, she'd stolen people's dignity, one notice at a time. That morning, I decided I wouldn't stop until her entire scheme was exposed. I spent the next week working with the county housing department, handing over every document, every recording, every statement. The investigator, a man named Ellis, was methodical but blunt. "We've been hearing whispers about Maplewood Estates for years. You just gave us the paper trail we needed." They launched an official audit. Subpoenas followed. Then came the day every resident of Maplewood will remember. The day Janet Reynolds was escorted out of her home in handcuffs. It was early morning. The street was quiet except for the whine of police radios and the hum of engines. I watched from my porch as they led her down her perfectly swept walkway, her immaculate blazer soaked by drizzle. She didn't look angry or afraid, just hollow. Neighbors lined the sidewalks, whispering, some recording, some just staring. No one clapped, no one cheered. It wasn't triumph, it was closure. Because when someone controls you for that long, even their downfall feels heavy. In the weeks that followed, Maplewood changed slowly, awkwardly, but genuinely. The fines were suspended, the bylaws were reviewed. A new board was elected, this time with actual transparency. Paul, the retired accountant, became treasurer. Mrs. Park joined as a community liaison. Even Lena got involved, leading the new Neighborhood Welcome Committee. The real one, not Janet's version with rule books and muffins. But for all the change, I couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered, like a shadow that hadn't quite faded. Maybe it was because of the letters. Even after Janet's arrest, envelopes kept appearing in my mailbox. No return address, no handwriting this time, just printed notes. "You think this is over? She wasn't working alone. Watch your back." I showed them to Ellis, but he said there was no traceable source, no fingerprints, no postmark. He looked uneasy. "Someone wants to keep the fear alive," he said, "but don't let them. That's how people like her survive, through silence." So I didn't stay silent. I talked, I wrote, I posted. I told every local outlet that would listen what happened in Maplewood Estates, how one person's thirst for control nearly ruined dozens of lives. And somehow people listened. The story spread beyond our small town. Other neighborhoods reached out, homeowners who'd been bullied, fined, or threatened by their own HOAs. One man from Arizona said, "I thought I was crazy. Now I know it's a pattern." That's when I realized
This wasn't just a neighborhood story. It was a warning. A few weeks later, a local reporter interviewed me on camera. He asked, "If you could say one thing to the people watching, to anyone who's ever felt powerless in their own home, what would it be?" I looked into the lens and said, "It's easy to let fear feel like order. But the moment you stop questioning authority, that's when control becomes tyranny. Don't hand over your freedom for the illusion of peace." That clip went viral, not because I said anything profound, but because everyone knew, deep down, what it meant. We all have a Janet in our lives, someone who hides control behind the mask of structure, who misconceives compliance for harmony. Months passed, the neighborhood healed in pieces, kids played in the streets again, the lawns grew a little wild, and no one complained. For the first time, imperfection looked beautiful. I fixed up the shed Janet had hated so much, repainted it, replaced the smashed bird bath, and planted new flowers around it. Lena called it our monument to stubbornness. Sometimes, at night, I'd sit there with a cup of coffee and think about everything that had happened, how close we came to losing not just our home, but ourselves. And then one evening, as the sun dipped low and the air turned golden, I saw something that made me pause. A moving truck. It pulled into the empty house at the end of the cul-de-sac, Janet's old place. A family got out, husband, wife, 2 little kids. They looked happy, hopeful, just like we once did. The wife smiled and waved at me. "Beautiful neighborhood. Seems peaceful here." I smiled back, but part of me hesitated. Peace. The word didn't mean the same thing anymore.
That night, as I walked past the old HOA office, now just a community meeting room, I noticed something odd. A single light was on inside. Curious, I stepped closer. Through the glass, I saw a file cabinet half open. On the floor was a folder labeled MWE Archives. Inside were copies of property deeds, signatures, payment records, and one name I didn't recognize. Gregory Hines, the lawyer. Every transaction Janet made had been signed off by him. His name was on every approval, every sale, every transfer. She wasn't working alone. Ellis was right. The fear wasn't gone. It had just changed shape. I took a photo of the file and closed the cabinet. As I left, the motion sensor light flicked off, plunging the hallway into darkness. For a brief second, I thought I heard something behind me. A soft click, like a door latch. But when I turned, there was nothing there. Maybe just the wind. Maybe not. The next morning, I emailed the photo to Ellis. He called within minutes. "You did the right thing," he said. "We're already looking into Hines. Seems he's been tied to other HOA management firms, and they've all had issues." I asked him what would happen next. He sighed. "Honestly, it'll take time. These systems protect themselves. But you cracked it open. That's how things change. One person, one neighborhood at a time." When he hung up, I looked out the window at Maplewood Estates. No longer the flawless postcard it once was, but something better. Human. Messy. Alive. And for the first time since moving there, I didn't feel watched. I felt home. Epilogue. 1 year later. A year passed. Janet was convicted of fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement, sentenced to 5 years. The lawyer, Hines, disappeared during the investigation. Rumors said he fled out of state, started another HOA under a different name. Maybe that was true, maybe not. But Maplewood stood, stronger than before. The new board set limits on power, made rules optional for minor aesthetics, even created a community freedom clause, a fancy way of saying we'll never let it happen again. Sometimes when new neighbors ask about the HOA scandal,
I just tell them this. It started with a shed and ended with a lesson. Because it wasn't about a building or fines or rules. It was about control and how easy it is to surrender it in exchange for the illusion of peace. Freedom isn't loud. It's quiet. It's a man fixing his fence without permission, a woman planting the flowers she loves, a family living without fear of a letter on their door. That's the cost of peace, and it's worth paying every single time. As the camera fades on the story, the image lingers on the shed, sunlight spilling through the trees, the sound of children laughing in the distance. And then, just before the video ends, a faint glint in the grass. Something small, metallic, half-buried. A camera lens. Broken, but still watching.